So this week we're going to be talking about some tips and some information for migrating to a different country with small children. We have a 10-month-old and a 3.5-year-old. So our perspective is from parents of small children. If you had older children, some of the information would be different, obviously. So first of all, what should you travel with as far as documentation and that sort of thing? Well, obviously passports. Obviously passports with at least 6 months in them for you and for every child, even if it's a small baby. Usually, you would get your work visas taken care of by the school. Children that, your dependents, they don't usually need any sort of special visa until they're 16, but that depends on which country you're going to, so you'll need to check to see if there's some sort of special requirements for visas that they would need to have. But usually, small children, they wouldn't need a special visa, but they do need a passport. I would also recommend that as you're traveling internationally, to make sure that you travel with at least a copy of their birth certificate. That's especially important if your family name is different than your child's family name. Some countries will stop and ask you just because they need to make sure that, obviously, that you're their parent and should be traveling internationally with them. So make sure you have a copy of their birth certificate with you, and also I think it's a good idea to have a copy of their vaccination records. Some countries might want to know what vaccines your children have had. Let's talk about nannies. I don't know about most people, but we would never be able to afford having a nanny unless we were working internationally. So coming from the US and the UK, we would never be able to afford a nanny. So we had absolutely no experience with what it was like having a nanny for our kids. In other countries you go to, nannies are much more affordable. Of course, there would probably still be the other options about daycare, things like that, but we used a nanny when we were in Ukraine, and we plan on having a nanny now that we're moving to Cairo. So let's talk about what you need to think about when hiring a nanny, when using a nanny. Obviously, you discuss salary, how much they're going to be paid. For that, you could contact other parents in the school and see how much they pay their nannies. You can find that information out from other contacts at your school to see what sort of the going rate for nannies is. We ended up in Ukraine paying our nanny a little bit more than probably the going rate would be, but it was still not that much for us. Obviously, you also want to talk about, what time do you need them to come in the morning? What time do you need them to be there till in the evening? If you're a teacher most lines of work, you're going to have to need the nanny to be a little bit flexible. There were days where we needed the nanny to come earlier than other days because we had morning meetings. There are days where we had things to do after school and we needed the nanny to be flexible and be able to stay a little bit later. And sometimes those things came up without us knowing prior, and we would have to just call the nanny and ask that she stay on for an extra hour or something. So you should discuss that with your nanny, that's something that could happen. You need to discuss with your nanny what happens when you have school holidays. So say you have a couple weeks off for Christmas or over the summertime. Do they still get paid? Now, the answer to that is usually yes, they still would get paid, even if they haven't worked at all that week. That's just how it works. Think of it as a retainer. You should not, when hiring a nanny, figure out the salary and then subtract any time where you're going to be away on holiday, because that's not fair to do to the nanny. They need that salary to come in, or else that's their living. If they don't have the salary coming in from you, they're going to need to have a different job. And if they don't take a different job, then you don't have a nanny when you come back from holiday. So our advice is that you will pay the nanny for 52 weeks out of the year, whether they look after your kids that week or not. It's a possibility that you might want the nanny to come away on holiday with you. So is that something that would be part of their salary, or is that something that you would be paying them extra for? Also, along the same lines, what if you needed them on an evening, you had to go to, say, a school event where you couldn't take the kids? Would that be extra, or would you just figure that that would be in their salary? And also weekends if you needed them on the weekend. Other things to talk to your nanny about: what would be, what would you require of them as they looked after your kids? Because a nanny can range anything from basically just a babysitter to a substitute parent. So would you want them to do other things like cleaning up? In my opinion, a nanny is a nanny and not a maid. But of course, if the kid, makes a mess, I would expect the nanny to clean up after the kid, assuming that the kid wasn't old enough to do it for themselves. Would you expect the nanny to cook for your child, or would you leave food that just needed warmed up? Also talk about what things you think are okay for your kid to eat or not. As far as healthy food or sweets allowed and things like that. You need to have all that discussed ahead of time. Discipline would be a big one. Make sure you talk to your nanny about discipline. What do you think is acceptable and not acceptable for them to be doing to discipline your child? If you're going to different countries, not every culture has the same views, so you need your nanny to be on the same page with you. Just communicate with them what you would normally do at home so that they can do the same thing when you're not at home, and then that's better for the child anyway. When we got our nanny in Ukraine, I was able to spend a couple of days with her so that we were both there, and so she saw our routine, she saw how I handled Connor, she saw what kinds of things that we did, and that made the handing over, and plus he got used to her. He was able to meet her. It wasn't just handing him over to a stranger. So I think there was about 3 days there that she and I were both together. And it was the same thing when Finley, our younger one, was born. We were together for a while. So he got quite used to her being there, even from the very beginning. Before we left Ukraine, we had to do a lot of sorting out of our things. A lot of things got thrown in the bin. A lot of things got given away to people. A lot of things went to charities. So as far as kids are concerned, our kids, especially the 3.5-year-old, acquired loads and loads of toys. There was also loads of clothes hanging around. We could not take all of it to Cairo, so we had to be very, very ruthless with what we were going to take and what was going to get left behind. If you're finding that you have a lot of toys or even sometimes clothes that have a sentimental value but has no other use, that they don't play with it or they can't fit it, something like that, take a picture of it. Take a picture of it, put it in with your memories, but you don't need to have the physical thing moving from country to country with you.
I'm handsome Gaia.